Now King Solomon loved many foreign women. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. This is the one thing that Solomon did that was most clearly like, just why, dude? You had great things going for you. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. I'm not even sure what the point of having this many wives and concubines would be. Like, how do you even remember all their names? Alright. So we are looking at 1 Kings chapter 11. So this is focused on the nation of Israel in biblical times. David was king and things were going pretty well, although there was a lot of conflict going on around them, a lot of enemies that David had to deal with. Actually, even within Israel, a lot of people kind of stirring up revolts and whatnot. After his reign, though, things were peaceful. Solomon became king and then had the ability, more so, to build these just massive, impressive things. Specifically, a temple dedicated to God and a palace for himself, along with other projects. But Solomon also being a very wise king, because he asked for that from God, essentially. He asked for wisdom when God came to him in a dream and asked what he wanted. So then other people came and sought wisdom from Solomon, and their gifts just further added to the wealth of Israel as a nation. And also then the just impressive nature of the kingdom of Israel then. So, yeah. That's kind of what's been happening. It seems like we're past all of that stuff. And now we might get a little more into the nitty-gritty of Solomon's life. At least the later parts of it. All the building projects and stuff took, just the temple and the palace took a combined 20 years. So, yeah, it was a lot. But anyway, okay. I'm gonna make extra sure that the music I've got going in the background isn't too loud. But anyway, yeah. Now let's hop into 1 Kings chapter 11. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, "You must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts to their gods." Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. It's that kind of warning there was back, I want to say, somewhere in the late Exodus to Deuteronomy portion of the Bible that a lot of people just kind of skip over. Maybe in Joshua, but anyway, I digress. So, yeah, I'm not even sure what the point of having this many wives and concubines would be. How do you even remember all their names? Do you even remember all their names at that point? So, I don't know. This is the one thing that Solomon did that was most clearly just why, dude? You had great things going for you. And it turns out because of all these women that he had in his life from other kingdoms who believed other things, they turned him away from God. Perhaps slowly, perhaps not, but the point is, he no longer, at least, fully worshipped God in the way that he should. So, let's move on to verse 4 and see what happens from there. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord his God, as his father David had been. Solomon worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. In this way, Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to follow the Lord completely, as his father David had done. So just kind of digging further into the details of, how he got pulled away from worshiping God. And, despite David's flaws, at least he still was completely dedicated to God throughout his life. Yeah, he messed up in some ways, but he didn't, turn away from God. Solomon, though, is actually turning away from God, which, not real long after essentially being reminded by God that if he stayed faithful and loyal, that the kingdom would remain, through it, that his descendants would continue to sit on the throne of Israel eternally, as long as they kept following God. How would you hear that and then do this? I mean, truthfully, though, in some small ways, maybe we all kind of have certain parts of us that are inclined to turn away from God. But, yeah, this was, more significant than that is the impression that I get. But, now, there's a note there at Molech. Hebrew says Milcom, which could be a variant spelling. Yeah, it's one of those things where ancient Hebrew, being a very different kind of language, it could just work in a different way to allow these seemingly very different spellings for the same thing. So anyway, Solomon turns away from God, and then we read verse 7. On the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, he even built a pagan shrine for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and another for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Solomon built such shrines for all his foreign wives to use for burning incense and sacrificing to their gods. So, not only is he doing this himself, but he's also, giving other people means by which to follow these other gods too. Specifically his wives. Note there at Jerusalem says, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. So rather than saying the Mount of Olives, it just said on the mountain east of Jerusalem in the Hebrew that this is translated from. But the translators probably figured it either was for sure or was most likely the Mount of Olives. Okay. On to verse 9. The Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshipping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. So now the Lord said to him, "Since you have not kept my covenant and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants. But for the sake of your father David, I will not do this while you are still alive. I will take the kingdom away from your son. And even so, I will not take away the entire kingdom. I will let him be king of one tribe, for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, my chosen city. Yeah, so that was kind of what was warned. That was what God had warned Solomon of before. And now he's saying, all right, well, now that you've messed up in this way and basically broken the covenant agreement that we had, here's what's going to happen. But, like, there's still leaving... God is still, even in amongst that, leaving glimmers of the covenant with David. And, you know, glimmers of hope for at least Jerusalem in the midst of this. Because that... with that being where the temple was and all that, like, that's the, like, it's kind of the most cherished, in a way, place to God. But it was certainly, at least for, you know, the people of Israel, like, that was the city, and the temple in particular was, like, the place where it was known that God was among them. And so, like, if God is going to, you know, do anything to Jerusalem, like, that would probably be the last part of Israel that he would relinquish to, you know, foreign powers or anything like that. So, then we get to verse 14. Then the Lord raised up Hadad the Edomite, a member of Edom's royal family, to be Solomon's adversary. Years before, David had defeated Edom. Joab, his army commander, had stayed to bury some of the Israelite soldiers who had died in battle. While there, they killed every male in Edom. Joab and the army of Israel had stayed there for 6 months, killing them. But Hadad and a few of his father's royal officials escaped and headed for Egypt. Hadad was just a boy at the time. They set out from Midian and went to Paran, where others joined them. Then they traveled to Egypt and went to Pharaoh, who gave them a home, food, and some land. Pharaoh grew very fond of Hadad, and he gave him his wife's sister in marriage, the sister of Queen Tahpenes. She bore him a son named Genubath. Tahpenes raised him in Pharaoh's palace among Pharaoh's own sons. Okay, pausing there for a sec. So, seemingly as a result of this covenant being broken and, you know, God's declaration of punishment upon Solomon and Israel because of the covenant being broken, now it's like, okay, well, as the means by which this will happen, God is, you know, preparing this guy Hadad. Hadad? I don't know. But is preparing this guy to, you know, basically execute that judgment. Or maybe it gets into how God has been preparing him for that. Okay. So this guy, Hadad, fled to Egypt when Edom was taken over by Israel, and then he lived in Egypt for a while, long enough to get married to the sister of Pharaoh's wife. So I guess Pharaoh's sister-in-law. Anyway, then we get to verse 21. When the news reached Hadad in Egypt that David and his commander Joab were both dead, he said to Pharaoh, "Let me return to my own country." "Why?" Pharaoh asked him. "What do you lack here that makes you want to go home?" "Nothing," he replied. "But even so, please let me return home." God also raised up Rezon, son of Eliada, as Solomon's adversary. Rezon had fled from his master, King Hadadezer of Zobah, and had become the leader of a gang of rebels. After David conquered Hadadezer, Rezon and his men fled to Damascus, where he became king. Rezon was Israel's bitter adversary for the rest of Solomon's reign, and he made trouble just as Hadad did. Rezon hated Israel intensely and continued to reign in Aram. So, two people that are like causing major problems for Israel toward the end of Solomon's reign. And I find it funny how we like actually don't even get an explanation by Hadad of why he wants to go back. I mean, it's kind of assumed that like he wants to get revenge, or at least like take back, you know, what his people had lost. But it's technically never really stated, at least not in this chapter or this section. Making sure I didn't miss any notes. Doesn't look like it. Okay, moving on to verse 26. Another rebel leader was Jeroboam, son of Nebat, one of Solomon's own officials. He came from the town of Zereda in Ephraim, and his mother was Zeruah, a widow. This is the story behind his rebellion. Solomon was rebuilding the supporting terraces and repairing the walls of the city of his father David. Jeroboam was a very capable young man, and when Solomon saw how industrious he was, he put him in charge of the labor force from the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, the descendants of Joseph. One day, as Jeroboam was leaving Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah from Shiloh met him along the way. Ahijah was wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone in a field, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 of these pieces, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and I will give 10 of the tribes to you. But I will leave him one tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. For Solomon has abandoned me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites. He has not followed my ways and done what is pleasing in my sight. He has not obeyed my decrees and regulations as David his father did." Okay, let me pause there for a bit. So, now there's trouble from within Israel as well. So this guy Jeroboam was actually, like, doing good things. He, kind of stood out amongst the amongst the workers. And so Solomon actually put him in charge. So that might be where he started to get some rapport among his fellow people. And possibly, you know, kind of start the idea of him being a good ruler. Real quick, note there, it's supporting terraces. Hebrew says the Millo, but the meaning of that is uncertain. That was how they translated the Millo in previous chapters, though, mentioning, like, supporting terraces. So repairs were being done. He stood out as a solid worker, was put in charge of other workers. And then he comes upon this prophet who basically tells him that Solomon messed up. God's about to take away Israel from Solomon. And you're going to be in charge of what God takes away. And it's pretty much because Solomon, you know, followed up these other gods and turned away from the Lord, Israel's God. And in that way, it seems it's reading a lot like earlier in the chapter did. But we'll move on to verse 34. And I think this is still the prophet saying what God is telling Jeroboam. But I will not take the entire kingdom from Solomon at this time. For the sake of my servant David, the one whom I chose and who obeyed my commands and decrees, I will keep Solomon as leader for the rest of his life. But I will take the kingdom away from his son and give 10 of the tribes to you. His son will have one tribe, so that the descendants of David, my servant, will continue to reign, shining like a lamp in Jerusalem, the city I have chosen to be the place for my name. And I will place you on the throne of Israel, and you will rule over all that your heart desires. If you listen to what I tell you, and follow my ways, and do whatever I consider to be right, and if you obey my decrees and commands, as my servant David did, then I will always be with you. I will establish an enduring dynasty for you as I did for David, and I will give Israel to you. Because of Solomon's sin, I will punish the descendants of David, though not forever. Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but he fled to King Shishak of Egypt and stayed there until Solomon died. So that was why it didn't happen right away. Because Jeroboam basically had to flee for his life. So yeah, that also sounded a lot like what was stated earlier in the chapter, that, like, yes, God's going to take the kingdom away from Solomon, more accurately from his son, kind of for David's sake. David was Solomon's father, and David, you know, followed God throughout his life. So, like, it, as a way of continuing to respect David and his legacy, God's going to wait until Solomon's son is in charge before taking the kingdom away. But still, what is taken away is going to end up being ruled by Jeroboam, according to this prophet. And then it mentioned Solomon trying to kill Jeroboam. Jeroboam has to flee, and that's why it doesn't really happen right away. But then once Solomon's dead, you know, that kind of gives Jeroboam an opening to come back in to the picture. Okay. We'll get to verse 41 here and then wrap up the chapter. The rest of the events in Solomon's reign, including all his deeds and his wisdom, are recorded in the book of the Acts of Solomon. Solomon ruled in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. When he died, he was buried in the city of David, named for his father. Then his son Rehoboam became the next king. So, I really wonder about some of these other books. Like, how many of these are there actually, like, you know, ancient manuscripts of? Because, like, unless this is completely named something different in a different part of the Bible, that's not in the Bible then. So I almost wonder sometimes about reading some of these other things to get a little more context and or information on the lives of some biblical figures or what happened around those times. But, so yeah, Solomon was king for 40 years, and then the kingdom passed on to his son, leaving the window open for when God said he would take the kingdom away. But that's how chapter 11 wraps up. Alright, so basically, Solomon, you know, drifts away from God, basically nullifying the agreement that they had. But out of respect for David, God says, alright, it's going to be after Solomon's time as king that I'm going to split the kingdom up. But he was already kind of working on the things that would eventually lead to that. Such as Jeroboam's situation, hearing from that prophet, but then, you know, Solomon, I guess, tried to make that not happen, and he flees to Egypt. Probably to swoop in later. But anyway, so, yeah, it really did not take very long. Even after they built the temple specifically for the Lord and all that kind of stuff and made a covenant, the same person just kind of messes it all up. But anyway, so as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see new videos as I post them and keep up with this Bible study as it comes out. Make sure you look down in the description for links to social media pages and Discord server and supporter page and all sorts of good stuff like that. And then leave comments down below there with any thoughts or questions you have. So that'll do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.